Hello, everybody. Thank you. This is the manufacturing SIG meeting from Feng. I appreciate everybody coming in. Today we have Emilie Schario from Turbine, and she's going to talk to us about data and how data alone is not enough. And I'll let her do the rest of the intro. Just to get started here, we do have a pretty sizable group, so we're not going to do introductions over Zoom. So if you'd like, please introduce yourself in the chat. My name is Scott Myers. I'm currently out of Calgary, Alberta in Canada, and currently working for a company called Pluralock. Chris Thomas here is also leading the manufacturing SIG. I will let Chris introduce himself briefly.
Yeah, sure. Chris Thomas, Manufacturing SIG Chair. I'm in the Dallas area, and I am on my own fractional CFO. Thanks,
Chris. And we also have Lori Fan here helping us with all the technicalities. Lori.
Yep, I am one of the FENG's administrative assistants, and I'm here to just support the whole meeting.
So again, thank you everybody for being here. I'd love to turn it over to Emilie. What we'll do is she's going to give her presentation. If you have any questions while you're going through, feel free to collect them in the chat. And then once we get to the end of the presentation, we'll have a dialogue and also put some questions in. And like I said, if you'd like to introduce yourself, throw your LinkedIn, please do so in the chat. And thank you. And Emilie, excited to hear from you. So I'll let you get started.
Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Chris and Lori, for helping put this together. And thanks everyone for carving out some time. I would be curious what time zone it is for everyone. I know, so I'm mom to two small humans. So I got out of bedtime tonight, which feels like a double perk of getting the chance to spend an hour with you all. So thanks again for carving out some time. I'm really excited to tell you about why data alone is not enough. First, a little bit of background on me. So my name is Emilie Schario. My pronouns are she, her. I'm currently based in Columbus, Georgia, where I've been for the last 3 years. And I'm CEO and founder of Turbine. I was previously director of data at Netlify, where I led data engineering, analytics engineering, data analytics, and ML initiatives. Prior to that, I was the first data analyst at GitLab. I joined at about employee 280, watched the company grow to over 1,300, served in a number of different roles there, including spending a year as chief of staff to Sid Sibrandy, the CEO. While there, I worked on projects like revenue recognition and financial reporting before they were a public company. And I also, a bunch of other roles, but I also was the first data hire at Smile Direct Club, which is also now a public company. And for the last decade, I've identified and called myself, I'm a data person. People would ask me, so what do you do? I'm a data person. And recently, in like the last year and a half, I've realized that that's actually a lie. I'm not a data person because most data people are focused on the wrong thing. For years, data teams and companies have been working towards making better tools, making it easier for people to consume analytics in companies. They've been working harder and harder towards some version of self-serve and reporting. But the reality is that better data and better analytics is the wrong goal. Reporting is a gateway drug. I dropped the link to this blog post in the chat, but I'll repost it at the end if you didn't already see it come through. This is from a great blog called Locally Optimistic, which is written for and by data professionals. And reporting is a great gateway drug is absolutely true. But more than reporting, analytics, and visibility alone is required to drive change in a company. We need to focus on being more efficient, on being more profitable, on growing more revenue, on building a better organization, on driving actual organizational change. Reporting is helpful because when done exceptionally well, they can help you understand where to direct your focus. But analytics, just having numbers, does not drive changes for an organization. Specific example, knowing that your conversion rate is going down does nothing to improve your conversion rate. Understanding which marketing campaigns are working does nothing to help you decide where to allocate your future marketing dollars. And it almost certainly does not answer the why question. Why is a particular marketing campaign outperforming others? No amount of reporting is going to tell you that. Today, data initiatives are too focused on democratizing access to information and not enough on driving business impact. No amount, I'm seeing heads nod, which always feels like a positive reinforcement here. No amount of information alone actually drives changes in a company. For meaningful change, companies need their information tied to the tooling and the systems that allows them to actually drive change. And hopefully everyone's, but I won't assume, everyone's familiar with this Drake meme where it's like the old version, it's kind of like tired wired. So, the tired version is data democratization, but the actual wired version is driving business impact, which is how we should really think about how we want to be operating with data. So that's a bit nebulous. What is business impact, right? Like, what does that mean? Some examples listed here: creating new revenue, being more efficient, growing more quickly, building better organizations, identifying pains before they're costly problems. Or another way to think of it, I also dropped the link to this blog post earlier, but I will resend it afterwards. But there's this framework that I used as a data leader: the jobs to be done of modern data teams. And so when we think about how data teams generally drive impact to a business, it falls into one of these 5 categories: data activation, metrics management, proactive insight discovery, driving experimentation, and interfacing with the data. And I'll use an example for driving experimentation. How many of you have ever used Airbnb? Looking for hands. A few of you. Okay. So my friend Chase Sharma is CEO and founder of a company called EPO, an experimentation platform. And he was one of the early data scientists at Airbnb. And if you've ever tried to book a listing, or whether it's on Airbnb, whether it's on hotels.com or any system, you'll know that, like, when you're looking at a bunch of different hotels, the typical workflow is opening them in a bunch of different tabs. So you can see, how far is this one from the stadium we want to go to? And how close is this one to that? And so Che talks about how they were able to see improved bookings just by having that link open in a new tab instead of redirecting that tab. So that's an example of the data team being able to really drive and quantify impact, or the organization at all, being able to quantify and create new revenue by using data. But even having that insight alone would not make a difference if they didn't also tie it to revenue. See, data and analytics teams have become increasingly important in organizations in recent years. Data scientist was considered the sexiest job of the 2000s. Data teams are piecing together data in the data warehouse because companies are scattered across different systems. The average knowledge worker uses 14 SaaS apps to do their job. But the end result is that data teams are actually often an arm's length away from the actual work and the data being generated. So they end up building relationships with stakeholders and domain experts who are doing the work. But in order to do that, data teams end up doing a significant amount of reporting. And that reporting work is fine when it's part of toll paying to eventually move up this data team maturity scale. I'll also link to this blog post if I didn't already. But most companies get stuck here. There are so many data sets and so many functions across a company that most teams never break out of their reporting roles. And so instead, my plea to you is stop waiting for some report to save you. Stop being at the mercy of the data team. Stop asking for numbers because numbers won't do anything you don't already know. Instead, focus on what results you're trying to drive toward. If overall conversion rate is down, I want to know if there's any trend in demographics where it's down, if it's an overall decrease, if it's, what's going on under the curtain. If it's across the board, let's see if there are any changes to the checkout process or the website that align to the checkout process. We see that we change login to be at the top or the beginning of the checkout instead of at the end. Great, let's revert that change. We don't need to quantify impact before we make a decision like that. Or an example more relevant to you all might be around margins and COGS on goods, right? If our margins are getting better, production run over production run, but this last one is super high. Even if the data person sees that, it's unlikely that they have the context to address it. And the data doesn't include that you had to pay a rush delivery fee because some packaging got lost. But you already know that, and you've already addressed the root cause problem. So relying on some reporting to give you that answer or to highlight that problem to you is actually too late, too far after the fact. So what are examples of how we use data valuably then, right? If I'm saying that data alone is not enough, how do we actually put this data to use? Clear goals, identifying actionable insights that can drive changes, and prioritize initiatives based on their expected impact. But again, and I'll emphasize this over and over, if the data is wholly divorced from the work of the business, then reporting is just a distraction. So, that's lofty. I talked through a bunch of things, but what are specific examples of what that looks like? What does it mean to use data to drive outcomes? So here's a list of possible outcomes. Cut inventory in half, on hand by half, because that's a better number for stockouts. Introduce a discount to some segment of your audience that gets them to buy now. Roll out a new onboarding experience that gets users to the aha moment at twice the rate of the previous experience. Segment power users out of the main marketing email list so they don't end up eventually unsubscribing. Highlighting new users or highlights that to sales that certain users are ready for outbound proactively, right? Like these are all actions where data is underlying the flow, but not just saying these users are power users. Instead, we're focusing on how we can take that information and really turn it into something actionable for the org. Another way to think about this is that instead of asking better questions, we want to focus on identifying target outcomes. So for companies with physical goods where inventory is the most considerable expense, finance and operations professionals play a critical role in ensuring the company has the right amount of inventory to cover demand while keeping costs under control. As we like to say at Turbine, not enough inventory is lost sales, and too much inventory is tied up resources. And while data and reporting are important tools for you all, your time would be better spent identifying target outcomes instead of just asking better questions of the data you have. As Taylor Murphy wrote in a blog post recently, I'm pretty sure I dropped this one in the chat as well, a first order need for a company is one that is critical to the functioning of the company, and data is almost always a second order need. By focusing on clear outcomes, finance and operations professionals can work towards achieving those outcomes and driving the business forward without losing time to anticipating all the ways you might want to slice and dice a data set. This more practical approach allows the business to prioritize actions and make data-driven decisions that align with the company's overall strategy rather than getting bogged down in the details of data and reporting. So think about what that means in the needs of a company. The first order needs are the things that are critical to the function of a company, the team that's building your product or manufacturing your product. And while a data team would be an accelerator, they're not critical, and so they're considered a second order need. So another way to think about it, a first order need for a company with inventory is its inventory. A first order need for a SaaS app would be uptime and engineering productivity. A first order need for a marketplace business would be both supply and demand. So again, I harp back to this idea, instead of asking better questions, identify target outcomes. So instead of saying, what was our stock out rate over the last year, saying, what is the right amount of inventory for that SKU that minimizes stockouts? Right? Very similar, but fundamentally different. Better visibility, better analytics, better reporting is rarely the answer to whatever problem you're facing. The effects of better visibility are what we need. When you do the work day in and day out, you already have a sense of the answer to whatever question you're looking to get data for. In all my years of working in data, working closely with executives, working with team members at all levels of the organization, I've seen over and over that data is usually only confirmatory evidence, and it is rarely, if ever, groundbreaking. You might not have known if the order volume was 10 or 10.2, but you knew what the kind of right answer was. And that's how it passes your sniff test in order to be useful. So when I think about what this means to the business, it's almost always around how do we actually put this information to use. Now, I'm hoping we can turn it over to question and answer here. I'll stop sharing my screen in just a second. Like I said, my name is Emilie Schario. I'm CEO and founder of Turbine, a lightweight ERP for companies that manage physical inventories. This is my contact information. I can also drop my email in the chat. But let's jump into it. I see a couple of things in the chat.
Great. Yeah. So why don't we start? Looks like there's a couple questions in the chat. So let's start. So first question was, this is all about operationalizing the nexus between the data team, finance, business partners, sales, operations, stakeholder. I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's almost as much a commentary on org structure as any other question. I have seen different org structures for data teams work. I have strong opinions that I'm happy to get into. Generally, I like to take I like to use the phrase locally or centrally reporting, locally prioritized. So what that means in the way I mean it, I've always put that caveat on it because I'm sure some other people use that phrase to mean something else, but a data person should report to another data person. You should have a manager that knows and understands your job, that can coach you, help develop you professionally. But almost always, you should also be, quote unquote, very strong air quotes here, embedded in the organization. And so the model that really does not work well is the service desk model for data teams. And that's that reporting model I mentioned earlier, where you submit a ticket. How many new users signed up week over week, right? You submit a ticket, you wait 3 weeks, and then it comes back. I see you're off mute. Did you want to add anything to that, Anav?
Yes, I actually have very pertinent experience in this. Is it Emily? Am I pronouncing it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. So I was engaged in a prior gig to help the organization eliminate 2 distribution centers. And no one really had any idea of which customers were served from them and which products were purchased and who the vendors were. So I had a very able senior manager.
How did they know they needed to consolidate or eliminate them?
Oh, that was an organizational imperative. So the company that bought our company, yeah, that's the other question that I had of Emily was, how do you know what the right options are? But the thing that made this project work, though, was the combination between me and finance, my business partner in sales, and a very back and forth, lovely interaction between me and the senior manager in IT. So he had the basic infrastructure that he had outlined, and I had questions of him, and he used the basic infrastructure to get more and more insights, as a result of which we were able to successfully eliminate this warehouse. Start to finish, it was a 6-month project, but there was so much back and forth. So again, I completely empathize with what Emily said, but the problem is, okay, that was a lovely ending to a story. But then if you were to have a data team, just like you were saying, Emily, and then you have insights, the problem though is all we see are these tips of icebergs all floating above the ocean. There's a wealth of actionable content from it. How do we know what the right questions are?
Yeah.
And I don't know. And that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm actually going to drop a link to someone who has delivered a talk answering that question better than I could Metric trees. Okay, so there's this concept of metric trees, which I won't get into what they are by drawing them out, but if you think about any business, most important metric, almost always, I guess not always, but almost always revenue, right? Revenue, we can break that down into two parts, new and expansion. If you break down and lost, and what you want to do with anything in the business is really understand, as you break revenue down further and further and further, what you're really trying to understand are what are the levers that we can pull that drive an impact to the business, right? So let's say if we keep pulling revenue, new, we can acquire new customers, we can engage existing leads, or we can acquire new leads, we can engage existing leads. You want to keep breaking it down. This concept's called a metric tree. I just dropped that talk in the chat but the general idea is just you want to understand what are the different levers that we can pull in the business. And if you're working in this model where you're very close with that finance business partner, you're very close with that sales ops stakeholder on the regular, it's never truly a surprise what the options on the table are. I'll put it differently. Oftentimes what I've seen across many stages of companies, across the dozens of companies I've consulted with over the last couple of years, is that people think, I mean, consulting is a great example of this. They hire and spend all this money to bring in consultants to perform this big analysis that tells them that they can do the thing they wanted to do anyway, right? And so my point is not that data is a bad thing. I made my living off data. I think it's a great thing for the business. It's just that data alone, just having information, is an insufficient goal if it's not also tied to something that moves the needle for the business. How did you end up, if you don't mind sharing, I'd love to hear more about how that project played out.
Well, for sure. So just to provide context, so I used to work for Dean Foods, the nation's biggest dairy provider, and Dean Foods was purchased by DFA Dairy Brands. Dean Foods had a mixing center model with 2 warehouses, and DFA Dairy Brands did not believe in that model. They wanted to eliminate warehousing from product flow. So when my business partner said, Anand, we need to get rid of these 2, make it happen, I had no clue how to get this done because there was so much we didn't know. And again, what made this happen was this IT business partner. He was awesome. He knew what he had access to, and he didn't know what questions I would have. So it was absolutely a partnership between questions asked of IT asking clarifying questions back to finance and to sales, back and forth, to then lead to a decision tree, like you mentioned. Once we had the insights and I was able to build out my finance model, I then had my associate, a finance manager, have conversations with the regional leaders, each of whom had products purchased for their customers. And we had to then work with the customers to reroute. Some products would be continued, some products would be discontinued because we're getting rid of those 2 warehouses. So again, operationalizing data insights. And once it actually happened and we said, hey, customer A, for instance, Dollar General, sorry, we can't serve you with these SKUs anymore. It has to be a replacement. That would happen only with the regional sales leaders, not by finance, frankly. And so once that whole thing was complete and we had deadlines and ETAs, and we said, okay, this is the total amount of costs for including those 2 warehouses. Go forward is roughly $2 million savings. We actually could make it happen because that cost structure was removed from the business. Staffing was let go, rent was stopped. So this was an absolute, you can put your finger on the savings. A lovely ending to a story, like I said, but like Stephen was saying, okay, all this is great when someone identifies, make this happen. Now, let's just say there is an organization with now a great data system. How does one now know what are the strategic imperatives we want to ask of IT and finance and operations? again, one thought in my brain, because I'm a corporate finance guy, is to use the DuPont ratio and say, what are the operational impacts to margin? What are the leverage impacts to margin? How efficiently are we using assets? But again, that's all so high level. Corporate finance folks are not good with business partners. They may talk finance, but how do you translate that to an operation? That's the gap. Maybe your point is it's industry specific, and we need to talk to the industry experts to see, hey, what are the levers that move the business? Sorry, I was
Yeah,
so
I mean-
long-winded. I hope that helped. So
No, that was great. And I hear it even as you're saying it. It's almost like this idea that the data team lives under IT.
Mhm.
And I actually think that's part of the problem, because that separation means that data people are never close enough to make those recommendations. But the business people, whether it's operations or supply chain or whomever it might be, are never close enough to the data to know the answer.
Mhm. And that's where finance, I mean, frankly, and I don't know if finance is the right liaison, but I was that liaison, and I had to connect between the two.
Yeah, finance is usually the glue in the middle, right?
Yeah, I know.
So I have seen that finance business partners are often the glue in the middle. Growth teams, like teams, not marketing, not demand gen, but growth in the product sense of the word. Those teams are often also the glue, because they're so metric driven from the beginning. And so oftentimes when a company brings in a growth org, they start by saying, what are the levers in this business? What is the metric tree on how we measure our success? And I think the thing that finance people often play, the role that finance people often play, is identifying those levers first. And that's the similarity between growth team members, is decomposing the business into those levers that can pull. What that means is values on a spreadsheet, right? If we add a couple more salespeople, what does that mean for revenue? Or if we add some more inventory, what does that mean for our stock out rate? Or if we, whatever it might be, that's what we're trying to understand, is how do these things drive impact? But I agree. When one of the first projects that I tackled when I joined GitLab in 2018 was around ARR, better understanding ARR, better understanding how product usage tied to renewals or churn. And I think that was a project where people look at it and they think of it as a finance project, but it's really a whole business project.
100%. So you probably work with companies that make tangible products then, given your inventory focus, correct, Emily?
Yes, I was the first data hire at Smile Direct Club, which is a direct-to-consumer straight teeth company like Invisalign. Really interesting business in that it's 100% direct-to-consumer, but also a 100% customized product. So lots of very unique challenges. Also in a pre-Shopify era.
So Emily, I have a question for you, if I may.
Please.
And first, thank you. I think you put to words something that was probably in my mind for like at least a solid decade. So thank you in terms of
Glad to
looking
hear it.
at outcomes over questions is what I got from this talk. So question is, why do you think, because I think a lot of us might have experienced this in our careers, why do you think, or what have you seen that maybe why most companies aren't getting out of this reporting paradigm into a, I guess, question paradigm, or not question paradigm, but outcome oriented paradigm?
Yeah, I think there's two parts to it. The first is this separation that comes with the org chart, right? Everyone's familiar with the fact that org charts dictate a lot, competing incentives drive how people work with each other. And so I think the first one is that we do separate data teams or data people into the IT org over there. And they're seen as separate from sales or separate from finance or separate from whatever part of the org that they would drive impact in, right? If I pull that slide back up here, I had a slide that includes like a list of example projects, example outcomes. I'll share this really quickly. And so if you understanding what your proper stock out rate is, if you send that request off to a data person, no matter what level, job title, they're going to come back with an analysis, and that's that. But the reality, if it comes to something like managing inventory, is that you want to change it and continuously monitor it to see what's trending, when you need to reorder, things like that. But if the data team is separated, if they're over there, if they're disconnected from the outcome, it makes it very hard for the organization to see the value that they can drive. So that's number one. Number two, I think that most organizations, and I'm speaking to the wrong crowd when I say this probably, but most organizations do not understand the levers that they can pull to grow the business. They do not know what are the right things, the options that they have in front of them around growing, around being more efficient. They do not have understanding or visibility into that. That's something I think finance professionals do exceptionally well. That's what a financial model is. What does A drive B, drive C, drives D, right? Those are the things that most companies, I think, have no sense of why and how they can grow or become more efficient, right? Because those are two sides of the coin. And the end result of that is that it makes it very hard. They get data teams because they think they need data teams without knowing how to drive impact with data teams.
Like getting a car or something, or I don't know, getting
Yeah.
a wood chipper, but you don't have a lawn. Yeah.
Exactly. No, I mean, I have consulted with dozens and dozens of data companies over the last decade. I have this one memory very clear in my head. Company had just raised a seed round really early. They didn't even have that many customers yet. You should really do all of your analysis in a spreadsheet. You don't need to think about Snowflake and automated ETL and reporting and BI tools and layers and layers and layers of things, right? Like you should just be doing that in a spreadsheet. And those are the sorts of things that I think, especially in a zero interest rate environment, we saw a lot of companies over optimize, including investing in data infrastructure they probably didn't need, and investing in data personas that they probably didn't need. Great,
thank you. Anyone else have a question and want to chime in, either in chat or jump off a mute and be brave? I know we have a bunch of accountants here, but
accounting was my worst class in B school, and now I spend all my time in finances.
Mine too. No, I'm kidding. Except for tax, so I'm not taxable. Okay, give it another minute.
Thanks for sharing this link. I haven't read this MIT CSR article, but I just opened it and I'll give it a peruse. I dropped all the link to the relevant blog posts earlier, but I'm going to drop them again. And then I'll reshare my email and my LinkedIn profile. And I'm always happy to have follow-on conversations if anyone's interested. Whatever, I like to have smart conversations with smart people.
Excellent. Maybe Emily, if you just want to put up your details again on the screen just for the YouTube
Yes.
video, I think that's just so it's on the closeout. And then
Yes.
it seems like we don't have any more questions, so wait a little bit for that. And then, okay, last chance, everybody. It's you're gonna miss out if you don't. But no, thank you, Emily, for that talk. I really appreciate it. Again, I took out the outcomes over questions, and like I said, for me at least, definitely you kind of articulated very well what was like maybe in my head for about 10 years. So thank you. Yeah, thank you also to the members that joined today and everybody else that will be watching on YouTube. And Lori, thank you for your help. as well as Chris. Hope everybody has a good evening and a good weekend coming up.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.